I had always assumed that relocating to a new city would be the hardest part of starting over. I was wrong. The real challenge was the waiting, endless hours alone in an unfamiliar space, surrounded by boxes holding fragments of a life I was still trying to piece back together. The apartment had come through a friend of a friend recommendation, one of those too-good-to-question arrangements you take when your savings are dwindling. Third floor of a converted Victorian in Salem, Massachusetts. Original hardwood floors, tall windows that rattled in the wind. The rent was surprisingly low for the area, enough to fit my freelance writing budget, which in hindsight should have raised a flag. I'd been there exactly 3 days when I found the letter. It was Tuesday morning, and I was unpacking kitchen supplies when something slid under my front door. My first thought was that it might be a delivery notice or maybe a welcome message from the landlord. I set down the mismatched plates I was sorting and went to check. The envelope was cream-colored, thick paper, expensive to the touch. My name, Emma Richardson, was written in careful cursive. No return address, no postmark. Someone had delivered it by hand. On the back, the flap was sealed with deep red wax, stamped with a strange emblem, interlocking circles cut by thin lines. Who even used wax seals anymore? It felt like something from another century. Back in the kitchen, I slid a finger under the seal and carefully broke it. Inside was a single sheet of heavy paper, the same stock as the envelope. The text was typed in an old-fashioned typewriter font, slightly uneven where the keys had struck. Dear Emma, welcome to 447 Chestnut Street. I hope your stay here will be enlightening. The previous tenant asked me to pass along important guidelines for your comfort and safety during your residence. Please follow them closely. Do not leave your apartment between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. Do not respond to knocking after midnight, regardless of what you hear. Keep all mirrors covered during the new moon. If you hear children playing in the hallway, do not open your door. Keep the basement door locked at all times. These may seem unusual, but they have kept past tenants safe. Please, take them seriously. A friend, I read it twice, then a third time, waiting for a punchline. Surely this was a welcome prank. Maybe the last tenant had an odd sense of humor. Or perhaps it was some local performance art thing. Salem was famous for leaning into its supernatural past. I set the letter aside, but it lingered in my thoughts. The expensive paper, the real wax seal, it felt too deliberate for a joke. And the tone, calm but urgent, made it harder to dismiss. That evening, I decided to ask my downstairs neighbor. Mrs. Chen had greeted me on move-in day with homemade cookies and a warning about the building's quirky heating. She'd lived here nearly 15 years, so if anyone knew about strange welcome letters, it would be her. When I knocked around 7 p.m., letter in hand, she opened the door with a warm smile until she saw what I was holding. Her expression froze, and the color drained from her face. She glanced down the hallway before ushering me quickly inside. "Where did you get this?" she asked, shutting the door behind us. "It was slipped under my door this morning," I said, handing it over. Her hands trembled as she read. "Oh. No. What is it? Some kind of local tradition?" I asked. Mrs. Chen lowered herself into her armchair and gestured for me to sit. "How much did your landlord tell you about the building?" "Not much. Just that it was built in the 1890s, converted to apartments in the 60s. Why?" She hesitated. "The previous tenant in your apartment, Marcus Webb, lived there almost 2 years. That's longer than most." "Longer than most?" I repeated. "Your apartment? People don't tend to stay. Either they move quickly or," she tapped the letter, "they leave without packing. Marcus gave me his own list before he left. The rules were different in wording, but the meaning was the same." A chill spread through me. "You're telling me this is real?" "I'm telling you," she said slowly, "that the ones who ignore it don't last." She handed the letter back. Back in my apartment, I locked the door and read it again. It sounded like an urban legend, yet Mrs. Chen's fear had been real. I decided to research the address. What I found in the Salem Gazette archives drained the warmth from the room. 6 months ago. Mysterious disappearance on Chestnut Street. A tenant named Jennifer Walsh, my building, vanished without taking her belongings. The year before, a tenant left suddenly mid-lease, the apartment found fully furnished and untouched. Going back further, there was a pattern. One tenant a year, for over a decade, either disappearing or abandoning my specific unit. By the time I went to bed, I'd decided, prank or not, I'd follow the rules. That first night, I barely slept. Every creak made me check the clock, 11:47, 12:23, 1:15. At 1:58 a.m., I heard slow footsteps in the hallway, just outside my door. They stopped directly in front of it. Then, 3 soft knocks. Pause. 3 more. I froze, remembering the second rule. Then came a voice. "Emma, are you in there?" It was a child's voice, frightened. "Please, I need help. I'm lost." Every instinct screamed to open the door. She sounded 8 or 9, crying, "Please, lady, I know you're there. I can see your light under the door." But I hadn't turned on any lights. The knocks grew louder. "My mommy told me to find the lady in apartment 6. That's you, right?" The air in my room turned icy. My breath clouded in the dark. The voice whimpered, "I'm so cold out. Here. Please let me in." Then scratching began at the bottom of the door. It lasted minutes, though it felt like hours, until exactly at 2 a.m., everything stopped. The air warmed. Silence returned. I didn't sleep. At sunrise, I stared at the letter again. These weren't quirky traditions. They were survival rules. I spent the morning pulling public records. The building was constructed in 1894 during Salem's post-maritime boom as a Victorian mansion for the Whitmore family. In 1923, after the last Whitmore heir died under mysterious circumstances, it was divided into apartments. That phrase, mysterious circumstances, appeared again, and again in the archives in 1922. In 1922, 28-year-old Margaret Whitmore had been found lifeless in what was now my apartment, then the grand master bedroom. The official cause was listed as heart failure, though the article noted she had been in perfect health and displayed no prior illness. A close friend discovered her after Margaret failed to meet for a planned shopping trip. Strangely, every window in the bedroom had been covered with thick blankets, despite the warmth of June. I printed the article and stared at her photograph. She looked vibrant, dark hair pinned in the style of her time, intelligent eyes that unsettled me for reasons I couldn't name. The 1923 apartment conversion had created 6 units, mine occupying the old master suite and sitting room. But it was the rental history that truly froze me. Lease records stretched back decades, and the pattern Mrs. Chen had mentioned became painfully clear. Apartment 6 had been rented 127 times since 1923. The average stay, 4 months and 12 days. I made a spreadsheet. Organizing details helped me think. One by one, the same story repeated. Standard 1-year leases, broken early. Deposits forfeited. Belongings abandoned. Reasons varied. Job relocations, family emergencies, better opportunities. But the timeline never changed. 4 months. Always 4 months. The only breaks in the pattern were the vanishings. 7 tenants over the decades had simply disappeared. No forwarding address, no contact, sometimes no family to ask questions. The most recent was Marcus Webb, as Mrs. Chen had said. Before him, in 2019, graduate student Timothy Chen, no relation to my neighbor, signed a lease in August and was reported missing in December when he failed to appear for his winter exams. I was 3 days into my own lease. The child's voice, from that first night had returned twice more, always after midnight, always pleading to be let in. The second time, the voice was joined by the sound of a ball bouncing in the hallway, slow, deliberate, bounce, 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 in a rhythm that felt designed to lull me into opening the door. When I peered through the peephole, nothing was there, though the sound continued for nearly an hour. The third night, there were multiple voices, children whispering and giggling just outside. They knew things they shouldn't, my full name, my former address, that I was originally from Michigan. One even mentioned my ex-boyfriend David by name, asking if he was coming to visit. I had moved to Salem to escape David. No one here knew about him. That morning, I called Mrs. Chen and asked to meet. At a small cafe downtown, far from the building, I spread my printed research across the table. "You found it too?" she asked, quietly, glancing at my spreadsheet. "How long have you known?" I asked. She stirred her coffee without looking at me. "I suspected something my first year here, 2008. Your apartment had 3 different tenants that year. Each one left different. Not just scared, haunted, like something had settled inside their minds." "Why didn't you move?" "Because it's never targeted me. Whatever it is, it focuses on apartment 6. The rest of us only watch." She reached into her purse and drew out a thick manila folder. "I've been documenting everything for 15 years. Tenants above me. Strange noises, police reports." Inside were newspaper clippings, official documents, and her own handwritten notes, missing persons reports for the vanished, noise complaints from neighbors about late-night sounds from apartment 6, medical files on 3 former tenants treated for severe anxiety after leaving. "There's something else," Mrs. Chen said, lowering her voice. "I got this yesterday." She handed me a cream-colored envelope identical to mine. Inside was another list of rules, different from my own. For the protection of residents at 447 Chestnut Street, do not attempt to communicate with the entity in apartment 6. If you hear crying from above, play loud music to block it out. Avoid the basement after sunset. Tell no one about the building's history. If apartment 6 is vacant, do not allow children to enter. The Whitmore Foundation, I'd never heard of the Whitmore Foundation. But the name, Whitmore, made my stomach knot. "Margaret Whitmore," I said. Mrs. Chen nodded grimly. "Look at the bottom." In a different pen, a shaky hand had scrawled, "She's getting stronger. The new tenant is feeding her. Get her out before the 4-month mark or we'll have another disappearance." That afternoon, I drove to the Salem Public Library. The archivist, a kind woman named Dorothy, led me to the basement's local history section. "Another one from 447 Chestnut?" she asked knowingly. "Which apartment?" 6. Her expression darkened. "The Margaret Whitmore room. I'm sorry." The records showed the land had a far older history. In 1692, during the witch trials, a girl named Mercy Williams had lived on that very spot. She was among the accusers whose words led to executions, but later tried to recant. 3 days before she could testify, she was found dead in her cottage. She was 9 years old. Though listed as fever, witnesses said she'd been perfectly healthy earlier that day. The cottage was abandoned and later demolished. The land sat untouched until the Whitmore Mansion was built in 1894. Letters from the archives revealed that after moving in, Margaret had become obsessed with Mercy's story, visiting historians, seeking spiritualists, and having vivid dreams of a pleading child. In her last letter, dated a week before her death, Margaret wrote, "She comes every night now. She says she never meant for anyone to die, but she's been here too long. I fear she is no longer the innocent child she once was. She only remembers the anger. Margaret's death came exactly 4 months after moving in. I sat in the archives until closing, reading account after account until the truth was clear. Every 4 months, the presence in apartment 6 grew strong, enough to either drive a tenant away or take them. and I was 3 days into my own countdown. When I returned home, Mrs. Chen was waiting in the lobby. "I found someone who can help," she said. "His name is Father Michael Castellanos. He's not with the church anymore, but he's dealt with this kind of thing before." "What kind of thing?" "The kind that got him removed from his parish for doing what they don't officially allow." We met him the next morning in a quiet coffee shop outside Salem. He was younger than I expected, mid-40s, with graying hair and eyes that had seen too much. "Mrs. Chen told me about your situation," he said, sliding into the booth. I've been tracking the 447 Chestnut Street case for 8 years now," Father Castellanos said quietly. "You're the 16th person I've tried to help." "What happened to the other 15? I asked. 11 left within 2 weeks of our meeting. 3 vanished despite my intervention." His eyes dropped to the table. "And 1? He paused, staring into his coffee. "1 never made it out." My stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" "Timothy Chen, the graduate student. He reached out to me in October 2019, about 6 weeks into his lease. We tried every protective measure: blessed salt, holy water, protective markings, even a formal cleansing. The entity only grew stronger. It absorbed our attempts like fuel." He reached into a weathered leather briefcase and withdrew a thick file. "What you're dealing with isn't a typical haunting, Emma. It's what we call a residual feeder. The spirit of Mercy Williams has been anchored to that ground for more than 3 centuries, warping with time and fear. Every frightened tenant, every person who leaves in terror, every unexplained disappearance, she draws strength from it. Then why help me? Because I think I finally understand what she wants." He leaned in, lowering his voice. "She doesn't want to harm anyone, Emma. She wants to speak, to give the testimony she never had the chance to in 1692. The trouble is, after 300 years of anger and feeding on fear, she can't communicate clearly. All she can do is replay her final moments, the fear of a 9-year-old who tried to set the record straight. So what do I do?" He pulled out a small digital recorder. "You listen, not to the voice begging to be let in. That's her way of drawing you close. Listen beneath it. Document every sound, every word. Look for patterns. Messages may hide in the chaos. And Emma, don't let her scare you into leaving. The moment you run, she wins." That night, I ignored rule number 2 for the first time. When the knocking started at 12:47 a.m., I approached the door with the recorder in hand and pressed my ear against the wood. "Please," came the child's voice. "I'm so cold out here. Let me in." "I'm listening," I whispered. "What do you want to tell me?" Silence followed, long enough for my heart to slow, then a faint voice, fragile and cracking with centuries of grief. "They made me lie." By morning, Father Castellanos arrived at my apartment. His presence carried the quiet gravity of someone who had lived alongside unseen forces for years. A faint trace of incense clung to his clothes, oddly comforting against the stale air. After 3 nights of escalating disturbances, I was desperate for understanding. "Emma," he said gently, setting his leather satchel on the table. "What you've been experiencing is beyond most people's comprehension, but you are not alone." I struggled to process his words, a presence that didn't just linger, but thrived on emotional unrest. He explained that the rules I'd been given were not superstitions, but safeguards. From his satchel, he unpacked items that looked almost out of place in my small apartment: vials of blessed sea salt, pouches of herbs, chalk, and a small wooden box carved with strange markings. "Salt is your first barrier," he said. "Not table salt. This has been prepared for protection. Place it at every entrance, every window." I remembered the cold spots, the scratching at my door. "This box," he continued, "is designed to contain the entity if it tries to manifest fully. It's only temporary, but it can hold her long enough for us to act." The hours that followed blurred into preparation. I traced protective symbols above doorways and windows, the chalk gritty in my fingers. We laid salt along thresholds, windowsills, even circles around my bed. Sunlight weakens her, he warned. That's why you keep the curtains closed after dark. Avoid iron and silver. They provoke aggression. By nightfall, the apartment felt different. Charged, but shielded. That first night, with the barriers in place, the temperature dropped just before midnight. My breath misted, and the whispering began again. Soft, childlike, just beyond the walls. The knocking tested the salt line, but never crossed. Each morning I checked and repaired the defenses. Fatigue set deep in my bones, but so did resolve. My fear was her weapon, and I would not hand it to her. The final night of the week came with a new plan. Tomorrow, Father Castellanos said, we draw her out. We confront her directly, by breaking the basement rule. But we go in prepared. My pulse quickened, but I knew there was no turning back. My apartment was no longer simply a place to live. It was a battleground. I reinforced every line of salt, every mark of chalk. I could feel the air pressing heavier with each passing day, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath, and I knew tomorrow night would change everything. The nights were the worst. When the sun dipped behind the horizon and the building's creaks turned from harmless to sinister, the presence became more insistent. The cold swept through every room, and with it came whispers, children's laughter, warped into sobs and faint cries. The shadows stretched unnaturally, sliding along the walls like living things. Shapes flickered in the corner of my eye, gone the instant I turned my head. The knocking continued, its rhythm unpredictable. Sometimes a soft tap, other times a pounding like a desperate demand. I never answered, never opened the door. Objects began to shift on their own, candles knocked over, salt lines broken and scattered. The entity was testing, learning. Inside, fear gnawed at me. It wasn't just something outside anymore. It was seeping into my thoughts, twisting them. Doubts whispered. Was I strong enough? Were the protections only paper thin, ready to tear? Father Castellanos saw the strain. You're carrying this burden alone, he told me. Guard your mind as fiercely as your home. Fear feeds her, strength starves her. I clung to his advice. During daylight, I forced myself outside. Long walks under the indifferent sun, brief chats with strangers, crowded cafes that drowned out the echoes in my head. Yet as the week wore on, the pressure inside my apartment built. The entity answered, with escalation. One night I woke to every mirror in the apartment fractured into webbed cracks. I hadn't covered them completely, as Father had warned. Another night, the air plunged to winter's cold, and a shadow appeared, its face like a child's, but stretched and wrong. It only stared, black eyes fixed on me, until I said firmly, "You have no power here." It hissed and vanished. The wooden box stayed locked but close, its carved symbols grounding me in fragile hope. Sleep came rarely, and when it did, dreams were of dark hallways lined with silent, watching faces. My own name, Emma, felt fragile, as if being tugged from me. Still, I held fast. Running wasn't an option. As the final night neared, tension thickened in the air. Father arrived later than usual, drawn but resolved. Tonight is the turning point, he said. He laid fresh salt lines, inscribed new symbols, and lit candles that burned in strange hues. It will try to break you through fear, confusion, pain. Stand firm. When he left, I felt the weight of history settle on my shoulders. This was my fight. I began recording every disturbance, temperature changes, patterns in the knocking, into a worn journal. Rituals became my armor. Morning prayers, moments of grounding at midday, salt lines drawn each night. The silence in my home no longer felt empty. It pulsed with threat. Sometimes to breathe, I stepped onto the fire escape, staring at the cold, indifferent stars. I thought of Mercy Williams, not as a monster, but as a lost child, locked in centuries of grief. The entity's presence was never far, testing the walls I'd built. One night, I found a single grain of salt displaced beside my bed. A message, a challenge. The box in my closet seemed to hum faintly under the moonlight. My eyes kept drifting. To the basement door, the place I was forbidden to open, and the key to ending this. The day of confrontation arrived gray and heavy with storm clouds gathering over Salem. I had barely slept, mind looping over Father's warnings. He arrived at 9 sharp, carrying a larger canvas bag. "Today, we end this," he said. "We're breaking the basement rule, but on our terms." I swallowed hard. What happens when it's open? She'll manifest fully, Mercy as she is now, shaped by centuries of rage and sorrow. The basement is her anchor. He unpacked candles, holy water, a silver crucifix, and a larger wooden box etched with complex symbols that seemed to hum with energy. The silver is for binding, not harm. It will hold her long enough to speak, but it may also make her stronger for a moment. We worked for hours, creating a ritual circle of salt and chalk. The pattern seemed to shift when I looked away. Candles burned at precise points, prayers whispered in Latin. "You'll start in the center," he said. "It will protect you until you step out to speak with her. Then you'll be vulnerable." By noon, the apartment was transformed, a place between fortress and seance chamber. The ordinary daylight streaming in felt strange against such charged air. "Remember," he said, meeting my eyes, "Mercy isn't evil. She's a child who died trying to tell her truth. Listen, help her find peace." As evening fell, the temperature began to drop, not sharply, but steadily, as though the walls themselves were preparing. I ate a small meal I could barely taste, my thoughts fixed on the basement door. Father Castellano sat across from me, occasionally checking his watch and murmuring quiet prayers. Neither of us spoke much. We had already said everything that could be said. At exactly 8:00, as the last daylight faded from my windows, we began the final preparations. Father lit the ritual candles in careful order, each flame sending shadows dancing across the walls like living things. The protective symbols drawn on the walls began to faintly glow, reacting to the rising spiritual energy in the room. "It's time," he said, handing me a small brass key. "This opens the basement door. The building superintendent gave it to me earlier. He didn't ask questions, but I saw the fear in his eyes. He knows what's down there." I took the key, the cold metal pressing into my palm. My hands trembled, but my resolve had hardened. After weeks of living in fear, haunted by a spirit desperate to be heard, I was ready to listen. The basement door was at the far end of the first-floor hallway, just past Mrs. Chen's apartment. We walked down in silence, the brass key heavy, in my pocket. The hallway felt longer than usual, stretching unnaturally under the dim light. As we passed, Mrs. Chen's door opened. She stepped out, holding a small bundle of burning sage. Without a word, she nodded at us and walked away, trailing smoke in her wake. She knew. Everyone seemed to know. The basement door stood like a boundary between worlds, heavy oak, black-painted with iron hinges older than the building itself. A simple deadbolt, yet it seemed to hum with energy. "Once you turn that key," Father warned, "there's no turning back. She'll know we're here." I slid the key into the lock. It resisted, as if the mechanism didn't want to move. Then, click. The sound echoed down the hallway like a shot. The temperature dropped instantly. My breath curled into white mist. Frost gathered on the metal beneath my hand. From below came footsteps. Small, light, but impossibly fast. Emma. The voice rose from the shadows, clear now, a child's voice edged with sorrow. I've been waiting so long for someone to open the door. Father's hand gripped my shoulder. Remember the plan. Let her come to you. I pushed the door open and stepped onto the first creaking stair. The basement stretched into dimness, pale moonlight slipping through grimy windows. As my eyes adjusted, movement emerged. A small figure in a white nightgown, her form faint, but becoming more solid with each moment. "Hello, Mercy," I said softly. "I'm Emma. I've come to hear your story." She froze, looking up at me. Even in the dim light, her face was clear. A girl of 9, dark-haired, her eyes vast and heavy with centuries of sorrow. She was both beautiful and unsettling, innocent and ancient. "You know my name?" she said, wonder in her tone. "No one's spoken it in so long." I descended slowly, Father following. The basement was wider than expected. Stone walls, dirt floor, air thick with the scent of time. But the strongest thing was the feeling. Waves of emotion so intense they pressed against my chest. "I know about the trials," I told her. "I know you tried to take back what you said." Mercy's expression softened, her form stabilizing, as she spoke. "They made me lie," she said, the words heavier than the air itself. "I wanted to tell the truth. I was going to save them." "Tell me now," I urged, stepping into the salt circle Father was drawing. She spoke, and her story filled the room. How fear had gripped Salem in 1692, how childish games had turned into deadly accusations, how adults twisted events for their own gain, and how the truth became dangerous. With every word, she grew more real. Her nightgown no longer flickering, her feet pressing into the dirt. But with that presence came force, the air growing colder, walls glistening with frost. "They found out," she whispered. "I was going to tell the court that we lied, that no one was a witch, but they couldn't let me speak. I never got the chance to set things right." Father stepped forward, crucifix raised, not to repel her, but to keep the energy steady. "And then?" he asked. "They told people I was sick," she said, voice almost breaking. But I knew. I left the world with my truth locked inside me. The energy swelled. Old tools rattled against the walls. Dust whirled in spirals. It wasn't violent. It felt like centuries of grief being unsealed. "I can make it right now," I told her over the rising wind. "I can tell them you tried to save the innocent." Her eyes brightened. "Will you? Will you tell them I wasn't what they thought?" "I promise." Something shifted. The cold receded. The winds stilled. Mercy smiled, radiant and unburdened. "Thank you. I can rest now." But Father stepped forward. "You can choose to move on, Mercy, not just fade away." "How?" she asked. "By forgiving yourself," I said. "You were a child afraid and manipulated. You tried to do the right thing. You have nothing to atone for." She was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. "I forgive myself. I forgive the frightened girl who didn't know what else to do." Light bloomed, warm, golden, and pure, spilling from her like the release of a soul finally free. The centuries of guilt dissolved, leaving only the child she had always been. "Tell them my story," she said, her voice already drifting beyond reach. "Tell them some of us tried to stop the madness." And then she was gone, not erased, but freed. The heaviness in the air was gone too. We stood in the salt circle, candles burning low, breathing deeply. "It's over," Father said. We locked the basement door, but for the first time, I didn't feel the need for barriers. That night, my apartment felt like a home. The next morning, light poured through the windows. No cold spots, no whispers, no knocks. Mrs. Chen brought cookies and smiled. "It's finished," she said. "I spent the day writing, not for work, but for mercy. Every detail she had given me. It would become an article, then a book. Months later, her story appeared in the Salem Gazette, then in historical archives. Her name was finally listed among those who had tried to prevent the tragedy. I still live in apartment 6. The rules are gone. The haunting is over. But sometimes, in the summer light, I feel her presence, not as fear, but as peace. A reminder that sometimes the most frightening spirits are only souls waiting to be understood.